Heal me for $1 the billionaire laughed, until the black boy did it in seconds. The grand ballroom buzzed with excitement. It was a night of high society, with sparkling chandeliers hanging from the ceiling and the air thick with the chatter of well-dressed men and women, all eager to rub elbows with the city's elite. The charity gala was being held at one of the most luxurious venues in the city, a place where wealth and power converged, and where everyone wanted to be seen. At the center of the room stood Jonathan Blackwell, the billionaire whose name was known by everyone. He wasn't just rich, he was infamous. Blackwell Industries, his vast empire, had its fingers in everything, from real estate to technology to entertainment. To the world, Jonathan Blackwell was a man who had everything: money, power, influence, and nothing was beyond his reach. But tonight, something seemed to be missing. He stood there in his crisp black tuxedo, surrounded by admiring guests, but his mind was elsewhere. There was a subtle frustration in his eyes, something few people ever noticed. Jonathan had been dealing with a chronic injury for years, a condition that no doctor, no treatment, no amount of wealth had been able to cure. It wasn't the kind of pain that could be seen, but it was ever present, a dull ache that haunted him every day. No amount of luxury could make it go away, and for someone like Jonathan, who had always been in control of everything around him, this felt like a weakness. He had tried everything: the best doctors, the finest treatments, the most advanced technologies. Yet nothing worked. The pain lingered, a constant reminder that even he, the great billionaire, could not escape the limitations of the human body. It gnawed at him, but he hid it well. After all, what good was wealth if you couldn't conquer your own suffering? He had everything except the one thing that mattered most: peace from the pain. As the night went on, Jonathan became more restless. The voices around him faded into the background, the clinking of glasses drowned by his own thoughts. He was tired of pretending, tired of smiling and shaking hands while inside. He was anything but at ease. So, as he took another sip from his champagne flute, a mischievous smile curled at the corner of his lips. "All right, let's make this interesting," Jonathan said, his voice smooth and confident as he raised it to be heard above the crowd. Everyone turned toward him, curious. The conversation, which had previously been about charity donations and upcoming business deals, quickly shifted. Jonathan had their attention. "I have a challenge for you all," he continued, the smile on his face growing wider. "You all know my condition. This chronic pain I've been living with for years, and you also know that I've tried everything, every treatment, every doctor, but nothing works." He paused for a moment, letting the crowd murmur amongst themselves, intrigued by what he was about to say. "So here's the deal. I'll give anyone here a chance to heal me, for $1 million, $1 million to whoever can fix me, to whoever can take this pain away. And I'll make it clear, it has to be done by the end of the night. If you can't do it, then you've lost your chance." The room fell silent. People exchanged glances, unsure of how to react. Jonathan's words were both a challenge and an invitation. He was offering a sum of money so large it could change anyone's life, but it was also an impossible task. After all, who could possibly cure a condition that even the best doctors had failed to heal? Some laughed, others looked uncomfortable. Jonathan's reputation as a man who always got what he wanted was well known, and now, with this challenge, he was daring the room to prove they could do the impossible. But no one stepped forward. The room was full of doctors, scientists, and other wealthy individuals, but none of them seemed ready to take on the task. Elijah Thomas, a young black boy, had been quietly standing at the back of the room. He was dressed simply compared to the others, a black shirt and dark pants, but he wasn't bothered by his appearance. He had only come to the gala because he had been invited by someone who knew his mother. Elijah wasn't part of this world of wealth and luxury, yet there he was, standing among the city's elite. He had been watching the entire conversation unfold with a mixture of curiosity and detachment. Elijah wasn't the kind of person who cared much about money or status. He wasn't there to be seen or noticed. He was there because his mother had insisted that he attend. His eyes, though, were sharp, taking in every detail of the room, every flicker of emotion in the faces around him. As Jonathan Blackwell issued his challenge, Elijah felt a tug in his chest. He had been keeping his gift a secret for years, afraid of what people might think, but he knew he couldn't let this moment pass without doing something. He had always been able to heal people, ever since he was a child. His hands had a strange power, a gift he could never explain. He didn't fully understand how it worked, but he knew that when he touched someone in pain, the pain would fade. It wasn't something he had ever spoken about, and it wasn't something he had ever used for personal gain. But here, in this room full of wealthy, powerful people, Elijah saw an opportunity not for himself, but to prove something. He stepped forward, his steps quiet, almost as if he was walking through a dream. The eyes of the room were upon him now. He wasn't part of their world, but somehow his presence was magnetic. The challenge had been issued, and here he was, willing to take it on. As Elijah reached the center of the room, Jonathan's eyes landed on him. For a moment, the billionaire looked him up and down, clearly sizing him up. "You think you can heal me?" Jonathan asked, his voice dripping with skepticism. "You're just a boy." "What could you possibly know about healing?" Elijah didn't flinch. "I can heal you," he said, his voice calm but firm, "for the $1,000,000 you offered." Jonathan chuckled, the sound echoing through the room. "You must be joking," he said, clearly not taking Elijah seriously. "Do you even know who I am? Do you know what it takes to heal someone like me?" Elijah nodded. "I know exactly what it takes," he said simply. The billionaire's laughter died down, replaced by an air of curiosity. Elijah had caught his attention. But Jonathan wasn't about to let go of his pride so easily. "All right then," he said, his smirk returning. "Let's see what you've got." The challenge was set. The room watched with bated breath as Elijah prepared to face the impossible task Jonathan had set before him. Elijah wasn't here for fame or fortune. He wasn't even sure if the billionaire would truly keep his word. But he knew one thing: he had the ability to change Jonathan's life, to show him that some things couldn't be bought with money, no matter how much you had. And with that thought, Elijah stepped forward, ready to prove that sometimes the greatest power lay not in wealth or influence, but in the simplest acts of kindness and healing. The room fell into an eerie silence as Elijah stepped forward, his calm presence contrasting sharply with the tense atmosphere. All eyes were now on him, and the weight of their gazes felt like a heavy cloak on his shoulders. He was just a boy, barely 15, standing alone in a world of millionaires, doctors, and businessmen, all watching with a mixture of curiosity and doubt. His heart beat steadily, his mind clear. He had faced moments like this before, times when people doubted him, underestimated him, but he knew what he could do. He wasn't here to impress anyone or to prove himself. He was here to do something far more important: to heal. Jonathan Blackwell, standing at the center of the room, still couldn't shake the feeling that this was all some sort of joke. Elijah had spoken with such confidence, but the billionaire was used to controlling everything around him. He had wealth, power, and influence. People obeyed him, respected him. This boy, this child, was nothing more than a distraction, a brief moment of amusement before he could send him on his way. No one, especially not a young boy, could heal a chronic injury that had tormented him for so long. Jonathan let out a dismissive laugh. "All right, boy, let's see what you've got." His voice was cold and the words were laced with mockery. "You've got one shot, don't waste it." Elijah remained calm, his eyes locked on Jonathan's. His hands, steady and sure, twitched slightly as if they were already preparing to work. This wasn't about showing off, it was about doing what he knew he could. He had healed before, he had helped people in pain, both physical and emotional. But this was different. This was a challenge that he didn't expect to be easy, and yet he was certain that he could do it. His gift, this strange ability he had carried for years, was something he had never fully understood, but it had never failed him. He motioned for Jonathan to sit. Jonathan hesitated, the arrogance still present in his posture, but he slowly lowered himself into a nearby chair. The guests in the room, who had been talking amongst themselves, fell silent. They didn't know what to expect. Would the boy succeed? Would he fail spectacularly? They didn't care much about the boy. They were more interested in how Jonathan would react. If the boy succeeded, it would be a moment of legend. If he failed, it would be just another embarrassing story to tell over drinks. Elijah took a deep breath, centering himself. He closed his eyes for a moment, focusing on his hands. He could feel the warmth in his palms, the tingling sensation that always came before he began his work. It was almost like his hands had a life of their own, reacting to the energy inside him. He could feel the faintest echo of Jonathan's pain, a dull ache that had become a part of the billionaire's existence. It was there, like an old friend, never leaving. But Elijah knew it didn't have to stay. "I need you to relax," Elijah said quietly, his voice soft but steady. "This might feel strange, but it won't hurt." Jonathan didn't respond. He simply stared at Elijah, his eyes narrowed. The guests in the room were still watching, waiting to see what would happen next. They exchanged glances, some of them clearly skeptical, others intrigued. The idea of a simple boy healing a billionaire was absurd. And yet, there was something about the calm in Elijah's demeanor that made them wonder if there was more to him than met the eye. Elijah placed his hands over Jonathan's injury, carefully positioning them just above the billionaire's back. The pain that had been a part of Jonathan's life for so long was now the focus of Elijah's attention. He didn't need to know the specifics of the injury, the medical details. He could feel it. His hands seemed to know what to do. They had always known. The room was so quiet now, it was as if time had stopped. Everyone watched in rapt attention, as if afraid to blink and miss something extraordinary. Elijah's hands began to glow faintly, a soft golden light emerging from his fingertips. The light wasn't bright or blinding. It was subtle, almost soothing. A few gasps echoed in the room as the guests saw the glow, their eyes widening with surprise. Jonathan shifted uncomfortably in his chair. The sensation was unlike anything he had ever felt before. It wasn't painful, but it was certainly strange. He could feel warmth spreading through his body, spreading through the area where his injury had been. For a moment, he thought it was just his imagination, but then he realized it was. The pain was beginning to fade. It was as if the injury itself was melting away, as if Elijah's hands were working magic. It wasn't just the pain that was easing, it was the tension in Jonathan's body. The weight that had pressed on him for so long was lifting. He felt lighter, more relaxed, as if a burden he had carried for years was finally being taken off his shoulders. Elijah kept his focus, never rushing, never faltering. He knew the work would take time, but it would be worth it. The guests in the room were completely silent now, watching the boy who was performing what seemed like a miracle. As the minutes ticked by, Jonathan's face slowly changed. The tightness around his eyes relaxed. His posture, once stiff and guarded, became more comfortable. He could feel the change, feel the relief flooding through him. The dull ache he had lived with for so long was now nothing more than a distant memory. It was as if someone had turned down the volume on the pain, making it fade away until it was gone. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Elijah pulled his hands away. The glow faded from his fingers, and the room seemed to come alive again. Jonathan Blackwell sat there for a moment, not moving, his eyes wide with disbelief. He turned his head as if trying to assess the situation, as if trying to see if this was some sort of trick. But it was. The pain was gone. His back, which had been a source of constant suffering, felt normal again. It felt healed. A soft gasp echoed in the room. Jonathan's breath caught in his throat as he stood up slowly, testing his body. He twisted his back, moving his arms, and for the first time in years there was no pain, no aching, no discomfort. He turned to Elijah, his face a mixture of shock and awe. "How did you?" Jonathan started, his voice faltering. The confidence that had always been so evident in him was gone, replaced by something else. Humility, gratitude. It was hard to say, but one thing was certain. Jonathan Blackwell was no longer the same man who had entered that room. The room, which had been so silent just moments before, suddenly erupted into whispers. The guests couldn't believe what they had just witnessed. Some looked at Elijah with admiration, others with a hint of disbelief, but none of them could deny that something extraordinary had just happened. The boy had done the impossible. Jonathan still stood there, staring at Elijah, his mind racing. He had come into this challenge expecting to prove something, to prove that no one could heal him. But now, in the face of this young boy's quiet power, Jonathan was forced to reckon with a truth he didn't want to accept. He wasn't invincible. There were forces at work in this world that even his wealth couldn't control. I can't believe it," Jonathan muttered, still trying to process what had just happened. His voice was barely a whisper, as if the words themselves were struggling to escape. "You actually did it." Elijah simply nodded. "I told you I could." The guests, still in shock, began to murmur among themselves. Elijah had succeeded where doctors, specialists, and the world's wealthiest had failed. He had healed Jonathan Blackwell in a matter of minutes, and in doing so, had proven something much greater than anyone could have expected. The room was no longer just filled with curious onlookers. It was filled with people who had just witnessed a miracle. As the silence stretched on, Elijah stood still, watching as Jonathan Blackwell slowly tested his movements. He had healed the billionaire's injury, but now the true impact of what had just happened was beginning to sink in for both of them. Jonathan Blackwell stood, his eyes wide with disbelief. His body, which had been a constant source of pain and frustration, now felt light. It was as though the burden he had carried for years had been lifted in an instant. He flexed his back, turned his shoulders, and stretched his arms high above his head. No pain, no discomfort, just freedom. He looked down at his hands, almost as if he were checking to make sure they were still his. Then, without warning, he began to move faster, pushing his body to its limits, testing how far this newfound healing would go. He jogged in place, bending down to touch his toes, stretching in every direction. His face was no longer pinched with pain. Instead, he wore an expression of astonishment. "I can't. This is impossible," Jonathan muttered to himself, still processing what had just taken place. "I've lived with this pain for years. How did you do it?" Elijah stood silently, his expression unchanged. He had done what he had promised to do. He wasn't interested in the praise or accolades that might follow. He simply wanted to show that his gift was real, that it could help people, even someone like Jonathan Blackwell. The crowd in the room was now completely mesmerized, some of them whispering to each other, while others just stared in disbelief at what they had just witnessed. No one had expected this outcome. Jonathan, still testing his movements, suddenly stopped. He turned slowly toward Elijah, his face now serious. I don't know what to say," he said, his voice softer now. "You've just given me something I thought I'd never have again. Pain-free, normal, it's more than I could have asked for." For the first time, the billionaire's tone had changed. Gone was the arrogance, the bravado. There was a certain respect in his voice now, a recognition of Elijah's power. It was clear to him that the boy had done something that no amount of money or influence could achieve. This wasn't just about healing a physical ailment. It was about something deeper, something beyond the reach of wealth. Elijah didn't say a word. He simply nodded, as if acknowledging the gratitude in Jonathan's words. But there was something in his eyes that suggested he wasn't looking for any recognition. His gift was not something to be used for fame or personal gain. It was a gift to help others. And that was enough for him. Jonathan, however, was far from finished. He took a step toward Elijah, his face now full of determination. "You don't understand," he said, his voice tinged with something almost urgent. "I've spent millions of dollars trying to fix this problem. I've seen the best doctors, the best specialists. I've traveled the world looking for a cure, but none of them worked. You did it in seconds. You've done something I thought was impossible, and I don't just want to thank you for it. I want to offer you something. I want to make you an offer you can't refuse." The room, which had been filled with a hushed awe, now buzzed with whispers. The guests who had been skeptical before, the ones who had expected Elijah to fail, were now watching with bated breath. They were witnessing a moment of history, one that could change everything for Elijah. Elijah remained silent, his gaze fixed on Jonathan. He wasn't sure what the billionaire was about to say, but he could feel the weight of his words. There was a promise in Jonathan's tone, something that suggested he was about to offer something Elijah had never experienced before. Wealth, power, the kind of life most people could only dream of. But Elijah had no interest in any of those things. He had never cared for money or fame. His focus was always on helping others. Jonathan took another step forward, his expression intense now. "I can make you a part of my team. I can offer you whatever you want, money, resources, connections. You could have anything you want. I could help you expand your abilities, make them known to the world. Imagine what you could do with the right backing. I could change your life. All you have to do is work with me. What do you say?" Elijah finally spoke, his voice calm and steady, as if he had been waiting for this moment. "I don't need your money," he said simply. "I didn't do this to get anything in return. I healed you because I wanted to help, that's all." Jonathan was taken aback, his eyes narrowing in surprise. He had expected the boy to jump at the offer. After all, who wouldn't want to be rich, to live in luxury, to have access to the kind of resources Jonathan could provide? But Elijah wasn't like anyone Jonathan had ever met. The boy wasn't motivated by greed or ambition. He was different, and in that moment Jonathan realized just how different. "Are you sure?" Jonathan asked, his voice softer now, as if he were genuinely trying to understand. "I'm offering you the world. You could do so much good with the kind of resources I can provide. Think about it. You could help so many people." Elijah didn't hesitate. I don't need a world full of resources to help people. I just need the ability to do what I know is right. I've been helping people for years in my own way without any of your money or power. That's enough for me. Jonathan stood there, staring at the boy for a long moment, his mind racing. He had always been in control, always used his wealth and influence to get what he wanted. But here was a young boy who had done the one thing Jonathan couldn't do, heal. And not only had he healed him, but he had done so without asking for anything in return. It was a humbling experience for Jonathan. For the first time in years, he was face to face with someone who wasn't interested in his money or power. The billionaire exhaled slowly, his shoulders sagging with a mixture of frustration and respect. "I don't understand you," he muttered, almost to himself. "You're offering me something I can't buy with all my money." Elijah smiled faintly. "That's because some things can't be bought." Jonathan's expression softened, a flicker of something like admiration crossing his face. "You're right," he admitted. "I've spent my life thinking that everything could be bought, but you've shown me that some things, real things, are beyond that." The room was still, the guests quiet, watching as the two of them stood there. It was clear that something had changed. Jonathan had been forced to confront a truth he hadn't wanted to face, and Elijah, though just a boy, had made him realize that power and money couldn't solve every problem. "I don't know what to say," Jonathan said finally, his voice tinged with awe. "But thank you. Thank you for giving me my life back." Elijah nodded once more. "You don't need to thank me, just use your life wisely." The billionaire paused then, as if coming to some sort of understanding, nodded in return. He had no more words to offer, only a deep, wordless respect for the boy who had done the impossible. As the crowd slowly began to stir, Elijah stepped back, his job done. He wasn't looking for recognition or accolades. He had healed Jonathan Blackwell not because he sought anything in return, but because it was the right thing to do. And with that, Elijah left the room, his heart light and his mind clear, knowing that he had made a difference in the most unexpected of ways. The room remained filled with whispers, but now the mood had shifted. The awe that had previously filled the air was now replaced with a sense of respect. Jonathan Blackwell, the billionaire who had once been so sure of his power, was no longer the center of attention. No, it was the young boy, Elijah, who held everyone's attention now. He had not only healed Jonathan's chronic injury, but had done so with a calmness that seemed beyond his years. Jonathan's mind raced. He had been expecting to be unimpressed, maybe even amused by the boy's challenge, but he was far from that now. What Elijah had done was nothing short of extraordinary. He had defied everything Jonathan had come to believe about medicine, about power, and about wealth. No amount of money had been able to do what Elijah had done in mere seconds. Jonathan felt a strange mix of admiration and envy. As the initial shock faded, Jonathan took a few steps toward Elijah, his face now more serious. There was no more smugness or mockery in his tone. The boy had not only healed him, but he had also shattered the pride that had kept Jonathan from seeing the world in a different light. For the first time in years, Jonathan was questioning himself. He had never met anyone like Elijah. "Elijah," Jonathan began, his voice softer than it had been all evening, "I have to admit I'm impressed. You've done something I didn't think was possible." Elijah simply nodded, not reacting to the praise. It wasn't about him. It never had been. Jonathan took a deep breath, gathering his thoughts. "I know you didn't do this for money, but what if I could offer you something more than just cash?" His voice was now filled with sincerity. "You have a gift, Elijah, a real gift. You could change the world with it." Elijah looked at him, his expression calm but his eyes piercing. "I've already changed the world in small ways. I've helped people who needed it. That's all I want to do." Jonathan's expression shifted, his eyes now serious as he took another step forward. "But you could do so much more," he insisted. "Think about it. You could help people on a massive scale with the resources I can provide. You could cure diseases, help the poor, save lives. I could give you everything you need to make a real difference." For the first time, Elijah hesitated. Jonathan's offer was tempting, but he wasn't driven by the same desires that motivated most people. He didn't need fame or money or even recognition. He just wanted to help. The thought of using his gift for personal gain didn't sit well with him. "I'm already doing what I can," Elijah said, his voice firm. "I don't need your resources to help people. I've seen the good I can do on my own. That's enough for me." Jonathan was taken aback. The boy's refusal was unexpected, but it didn't deter him. He knew the power of money, the influence it could give. He had built his empire with it, and he believed that anyone, no matter their background, could change the world if they had the right resources. Elijah had a gift, and Jonathan was determined to make him see the potential. "You don't understand," Jonathan said, his voice growing more insistent. "What I'm offering is an opportunity to do things you can't even imagine. You could reach millions of people. You could build something that lasts, something that changes the world for the better. All I'm asking is for you to join me, to use your gift with the resources I can provide. Together, we could make a real impact." Elijah took a step back, his eyes never leaving Jonathan's. There was no hesitation in his expression, no doubt in his words. "I don't need your money, Jonathan," he said softly. "I don't need your empire, I just need my gift. That's enough for me." Jonathan felt a knot tighten in his chest. He had spent his entire life amassing wealth, building connections, gaining influence. And yet here was a boy with nothing but a gift, telling him that it wasn't about any of that. It wasn't about power or control. It was about helping others in the simplest, most meaningful way possible. Jonathan's mind raced, trying to find a way to convince Elijah. He knew that people like him, people with real power, never just let go of opportunities. They fought for them. They didn't let something valuable slip through their fingers. Elijah's gift was valuable, but what was more valuable? Helping others or ensuring that his gift was never wasted. "Please," Jonathan said, his voice softening. "Think about it. I'm not asking for your soul. I'm not asking you to be part of my world. I'm just asking you to consider the possibilities. You could do so much more with the right backing." Elijah looked at Jonathan for a long moment. There was a brief silence between them, and in that silence, Elijah could hear the billionaire's desperation. It wasn't about Elijah anymore. It was about Jonathan's need for control, for validation, for something bigger than himself. "I'm not here to change the world the way you think I should," Elijah finally said. "I'm here to help people, that's it. That's enough for me." Jonathan, still standing in front of him, looked down for a moment, reflecting on Elijah's words. He had spent his life trying to build something lasting, trying to prove that he could change the world. But in that moment, he realized something. Maybe Elijah was right. Maybe the world didn't need more people like him trying to control everything. Maybe what the world needed were more people like Elijah, people who were willing to help, without asking for anything in return. Jonathan's shoulders sagged, and for the first time that evening, he felt the weight of the years he had spent chasing the wrong things. He had focused on building his empire, accumulating wealth, and gaining power. But now, standing in front of Elijah, he saw that those things didn't matter as much as he thought. It wasn't about the money. It wasn't about the power. It was about helping others, making a difference in the world. "You're right," Jonathan said quietly, his voice filled with a mix of regret and understanding. "I've spent my life chasing the wrong things, and you've shown me something I didn't know I needed to see." Elijah nodded, his expression calm but resolute. "I don't need your money, Jonathan, but thank you for understanding." For a moment, there was silence between them. The other guests in the room, who had been watching the exchange with rapt attention, began to murmur among themselves. They had witnessed a shift in power, a change in perspective. Elijah had not only healed the billionaire's pain, but he had also shown him that there was more to life than wealth and control. There was something more valuable, the ability to help, to heal, to make a difference. Jonathan took a deep breath and stepped back, his pride no longer a barrier between him and the truth. "I won't forget this, Elijah. I'll remember what you've taught me." Elijah smiled softly. "That's all I need." As Elijah turned to leave the room, the guests parted ways, giving him space. He hadn't come for fame or fortune. He hadn't come to prove anything to anyone. He had come to heal. And in that simple act, he had done more than he ever imagined. Days passed after the extraordinary events at the gala, but for Elijah, life returned to its usual rhythm. The world had changed around him, but he hadn't let it change who he was. The people he had helped, the ones whose pain had been eased by his hands, were still out there and they needed him. That was what mattered to him most, the ability to heal, to make people feel whole again, no matter who they were or what they could offer in return. The story of his healing of Jonathan Blackwell spread like wildfire, reaching newspapers, blogs, and social media. It became the subject of every conversation at high-end dinners and business meetings. Everyone in the city seemed to know about the mysterious young boy who had healed a billionaire in seconds, and they all wanted to know more. Some saw it as a miracle, others as a chance to make a name for themselves by associating with the boy's gift. But Elijah wasn't interested in any of that. He wasn't looking for attention or recognition. He just wanted to continue helping those who needed him. Elijah didn't seek fame. He didn't seek wealth. In fact, he avoided the spotlight as much as he could. He went about his daily life, visiting the people in need, the ones who lived in small apartments, the ones who had no voice in the grand, shiny world of the rich and powerful. He healed the sick, comforted the elderly, and helped children who had no one else to turn to. There was no audience, no cameras, no reporters. Just him, quietly making a difference in the lives of those who truly needed it. One afternoon, as Elijah was walking through a crowded street, a familiar face appeared before him. It was Jonathan Blackwell, the billionaire whose life Elijah had changed with a single act of kindness. Jonathan had found Elijah a few times since the gala, but each time, Elijah had avoided him. Elijah wasn't interested in being part of the billionaire's world. He had made it clear that he didn't need anything from Jonathan, but this time, Jonathan wasn't going to let Elijah slip away. He moved quickly, stepping in front of Elijah with a determined look in his eyes. "Elijah, please," Jonathan said, his voice calm but insistent. "I know you don't want anything from me, but I need you to listen." Elijah stopped, his eyes meeting Jonathan's. There was a quiet strength in Jonathan's gaze now, something that hadn't been there before. It wasn't arrogance or pride or power. It was something more genuine, a desire to understand, to make up for the mistakes of his past. "I don't want to make things harder for you," Jonathan continued. "But I've been thinking about what you said, about how you don't need my money or my resources, and I respect that. I really do, but I've seen now that you have the power to do more than you think. You could help so many people, more people than you can imagine, and I want to help you do that." Elijah didn't speak at first. He just looked at Jonathan, his expression unreadable. Jonathan wasn't asking for anything in return. He wasn't offering wealth, fame, or power. Instead, he was offering something Elijah hadn't expected, a chance to reach more people, to make a difference on a larger scale. "I don't want your help, Jonathan," Elijah said, his voice quiet but firm. "I've been doing this on my own for years. I've helped people without needing anyone to back me. I don't need your resources to help others." Jonathan nodded slowly, his face showing no sign of frustration, only understanding. "I get that. I really do. But what if I could make it easier for you to help? What if I could give you access to a network of people who need you, people who don't have the resources to find you? I know you've been helping people quietly, but I've seen what you can do. And I don't want to see you working in the shadows when you have the potential to do so much more." Elijah was silent for a moment, thinking about Jonathan's words. He had always worked alone, always kept to the shadows. Helping people was what mattered most to him, not recognition or accolades. But could he really make a bigger impact if he opened himself up to the kind of network Jonathan was offering? Could he help more people if he had access to the right resources? Finally, Elijah spoke. "I'm not doing this for recognition, Jonathan. I'm not doing it for power. I'm doing it because it's the right thing to do. Helping people doesn't need to be part of some grand plan. It doesn't need to be something big or flashy. Sometimes the best way to help is just by being there." Jonathan's expression softened, and for a moment he seemed to understand. He had spent his life building an empire, amassing wealth, and acquiring power. But now, standing in front of Elijah, he realized that the real power wasn't in resources or influence. It was in the ability to make a difference, to help others without expecting anything in return. And that was something he had never truly understood until now. "I understand," Jonathan said quietly, his voice sincere. "I don't expect you to join my world or take anything from me, but I'll be here if you ever need me. I can't change the way you work, and I don't want to. But I want to make sure you have the support you need if you ever need it. I want to make sure you don't feel alone in this." Elijah met Jonathan's gaze, and for the first time he saw the man before him not as a wealthy businessman, but as someone who had learned, however slowly, the true meaning of giving. It wasn't about having everything. It wasn't about controlling everything. It was about helping others even when you didn't have to. "Thank you," Elijah said, his voice soft. "I appreciate that, but I'm fine on my own." Jonathan smiled, a genuine smile that wasn't tinged with pride or arrogance. It was a smile of understanding, of humility. "I won't forget what you've done, Elijah. You've changed my life, and maybe you'll change the world one day, but I won't try to make you do it my way." Elijah smiled back, and with that, the two men parted ways. Jonathan stood there for a moment, watching Elijah walk away. He had offered Elijah everything, but the boy had refused it. It wasn't because he didn't appreciate the offer, but because Elijah had something more important, a sense of purpose, and a belief that helping others didn't require wealth or power. It just required a willingness to act. As Elijah walked away, the noise of the city faded around him. He didn't need the world's recognition. He didn't need fame or fortune or power. All he needed was the ability to help others, one person at a time, and that was enough. Jonathan watched him go, and for the first time he felt something he hadn't felt in years: peace. It wasn't the peace that came from wealth or control. It was the peace that came from knowing that the world didn't need more people like him. It needed more people like Elijah. And for that, Jonathan was grateful,